Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Tuesday, the 4th of December, comes to you from London. And we're here at the European opening this morning, and the market's not looking as good as they did yesterday. We had a very strong day yesterday, and of course, it's inevitable that we're seeing some pullback. Dollar index is down again this morning, so we are just seeing the dollar turning a little bit bearish, not activating this downside target on the 60-minute chart yet, but bearish short term, hitting some long-term resistance, quite possibly. The euro looking stronger against that weaker dollar as the euro-dollar chart, and then looking at the Japanese yen, we're seeing the dollar sinking here, which is normally gives us a heads up, a further 1% downside potential there. Still bullish, medium and long term, of course. Sterling is up 0.5% against that weaker dollar. Against the euro, we're seeing sterling is actually a little bit stronger this morning, but still bearish on the short-term chart. And if we look at against the Swiss franc, we're still bearish there as well. Against the Aussie dollar, we're in quite a clear downtrend for sterling. Bitcoin still struggling, up this morning some 3%, but not enough to change the picture of it, bearish on all three time frames. The S&P 500 index was up 1% in the end yesterday, came back quite a bit from the opening, but generally speaking, we held on to the gains, and so looks like we are finding long-term support on the market there. That's the weekly chart. We've still got work to do on the daily chart. We need to at least break the November high that we saw there. The Nasdaq was up about 1.6%, and if we look at the Dow, that was up 1.3%. All of these charts starting to look better on the short term. We've got more work to do on the medium term. The futures this morning, the S&P future down 0.5%, the Nasdaq E-mini down 0.2%, which does suggest we'll open lower in the US. And we look at the FTSE 100, little change this morning, jumped yesterday, of course, gave up some of those gains during the day, and we've opened fairly flat this morning. Much the same on the mid caps, we're down 0.2% this morning, still looking pretty weak on all three time frames. The DAX is down 0.4%, looking better on the short term chart, but medium and long term still bearish. And then the CAC 40 down 0.5%, again medium and long term still bearish. Japan was down some 2% on the 400 index, and the Hang Seng was actually up 0.3%, and the Chinese market was up 0.4%, so they fared better. The Sensex up was down 0.25%, so looking better on that short-term chart. And then the S&P 500 200 index is now starting to look quite bearish on the long-term chart. It was down a further 1%. Brent crude holding on to the gains that we saw yesterday, sitting at $62.50, so looking stronger there. WTI, much the same picture. US nat gas sitting at $4.39, holding on to most of the gains that we've seen in the last several weeks, so still looking pretty bullish. Looking at gold, we're seeing gold at $12.39, so pushing higher. Gold really undergoing transition here, so looking stronger as well. And if we look at silver, also just pushing higher there. US 10-year yields sinking lower below that 3% level at 2.95. So all bets starting to fade on the rise in US interest rates. Looking at data from Yahoo Finance, just looking at the stocks themselves, here we see the global indices. We're in the green everywhere in the US yesterday. We're in the red this morning in Europe, and Asia, it's fairly mixed, but mostly red. So just a quick look at the Nasdaq overnight. We saw some quite big performances, of course, with that big rise in the market. Google Alphabet was up 0.6%, so not so strong there. Amazon was up a massive 4.8%, and Apple was also up 3.4%. Not enough to change the relative position of Apple, really falling relative to the market, down 25% on the relative chart to the Dow, so really falling away there. It's quite significant. Taking a look at some of the other bellwethers, we saw Facebook was up only a 0.3%, sitting at 141, so back into the 140s, but still looking terrible. And if we look at some of the other charts, we've got Microsoft. They were up 1%, steadily rising Microsoft and remaining in bullish territory, unlike many others. They've stayed there. Netflix is at 290, and Nvidia, which has had a terrible time lately, giving up a lot of the gains made over the past few years, was actually up 4%. And of course, the big one that's been bucking the trend lately is Tesla, and that was up a further 2.3%, still looking better than many other charts, despite what you'd hear in the news. Looking at the Australian market, we had quite a lot of stocks up. We had Santa Barbara up 3.9%, Nanosonics up 2.85%. On the other end of the scale, we did have a lot of stocks down. Sierra Resources down 8%, Western Areas down 7.6%. So we are seeing quite big falls there. China was mixed, but we know it was up. And Hong Kong also, we can see a mix of red and green. It was up as well. The Nifty 50 in India, the index was down, but we did have a few stocks that were up. Petroleum stocks doing quite well on that rise in oil. Hindustan Petroleum, for example. On the downside, we still did have some quite big falls here. So a mixed picture in India. And on the Nikkei, we see it was nearly all down, only 4 stocks up, so quite a big fall there. Looking across to Europe, we see in the FTSE 100 this morning, it's slightly down, as we said, quite a mixed picture. Coca-Cola up 2.6%, Randgold Resources up 2%, Rightmove up 1.87%. A lot of these charts still bearish on this medium term. That's the really big thing here. And if we look at the fallers today, we've got Melrose down 3%, bearish, medium and long term. Ferguson also down. A lot of stocks breaking their long-term trends, so really still quite a worry with downside targets hanging over us. So really need to keep an eye on that. Taking a look to the 250, just ranking by performance here. Again, it's all coming from Yahoo Finance. 2.5% to the downside. Looking at the other end, Thomas Cook down a further 10% this morning. Their woes just not ending, and so really very worrying picture there. Taking a look at the Euro Stock 600 across Europe, we've seen Rockwell International up 2.8%, but really a terrible chart. This is a theme, really. We're seeing very few good looking charts. Capita down 5% this morning in the UK, so that's not looking great. And JC Deco in France also lower. So we are just seeing still some quite big falls here across the board. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.